And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 36th National Business Book Award ceremony in its live and virtual format for what is now the second year in a row. I'm Peter Mansbridge. I'm your host for today's ceremony and chair of the National Business Book Award jury. I'm coming to you today from Ottawa, in fact, from the Chateau Laurier Hotel. I'm up in the nation's capital doing some interview work as part of a documentary that I'm doing actually on Arctic sovereignty and climate change, which will be airing early next year on the CBC. I look forward, as I'm sure many of you do, to next year's ceremony and award, because we'll have that, hopefully, don't we all hope, as we're used to, in person, over lunch, with what has always been lively conversation and connection, and we'll have it based out of Toronto. While this event is taking place virtually, we wish to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands on which we're gathering today, and we're on a lot of different lands as part of this program today. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. As I said earlier, it is our 36th year recognizing Canada's exceptional business authors. As you hear from today's presenters, and as you celebrate the winner of this year's annual $30,000 prize, I encourage you to join the conversation at hashtag NBB Award. That's hashtag NBB Award. I'd like to recognize all the past award winners who are with us virtually today. Some of the past winners, it's quite a list, include last year's winner, Andrea Benoit, author of Viva Mac, AIDS, Fashion, and the Philanthropic Process and Practices of Mac Cosmetics. Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, neuroscientist Daniel Levitan, actor, author, and filmmaker Naomi Klein, and esteemed Canadian journalists like Jackie McNish, Jim Leach, Gordon Pitts, Ian Brown. The list goes on, many, many more over the last 36 years. The stories these authors have told together through the years remind us of Canada's rich business history and the extraordinary depth of talent, expertise, and scholarship of its writers. 2021 proved to be a banner year. I don't say that lightly. It was an exceptional year for Canadian business writers and thinkers, whether through bold, groundbreaking business ideas, insightful analysis of today's rapidly changing trends, or through their own riveting and true stories. This year's 5 finalists demonstrate how Canadians are playing a leading role, helping the world navigate these uncertain times and solve our global society's shared economic challenges. They have consistently been recognized as leaders in spotting emerging business issues and trends. Their books are especially indicative of Canada's strong standing in the highly competitive global market of thought leadership. While our finalists have shared their own stories and ideas born of experience, each one has also provided invaluable prescriptive advice for organizations, governments, and individuals as we move forward, hopefully into the post-pandemic era. The 2021 award winner is selected by an independent jury, which evaluates each submission based on originality, based on relevance, excellence of writing, thoroughness of research, and based on the depth of analysis. I'd like you to meet my fellow jury members who sifted carefully through a record-breaking number of nominations to determine our finalists and our winner. Firstly, I'd like to welcome a brand new voice to our jury, the King of Bay Street and Dragon, Wes Hall, founder and chairman of the Black North Initiative and Kingsdale Advisors. David Dennison, We're welcoming David back as we do the other jury members. David is the corporate director and former president and CEO of the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. Deirdre McMurdy, vice president at Peerage Capital and our NBB award adjudicator. Award-winning author, publisher, and founder of Key Porter Books, Anna Porter. And the Honorable Senator, Pamela Wallin. Now, I thank all the jurors for reading and debating the many merits of what has been, and I say it again, a great selection of business books this year. I want to thank our sponsors and partners who make this year's award possible, especially during such an uncertain and challenging period. Our presenting sponsor for a second year now, Miles NADAL, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and chairman of Peerage Capital. Our supporting partners, Susan Kitchuk, the CEO at the Targeted Strategies Group. Stephen Smith, co-founder, chair, and CEO of First National Financial Corporation. Our media partners, the Globe and Mail, the Walrus, and MANSCORP Media Services. And a warm welcome to our award ceremony partner, Oxford Properties Group. And I'd also like to acknowledge the Government of Canada's support for the National Business Book Award this year. Now, I'd like to invite Deirdre, our Vice President of Peerage Capital and our adjudicator here on this jury. It has been a journey. It's been an incredible journey this year for the jury. To say a few words, Deirdre, about what's made this year's nominations so exceptional. Here's Deirdre.
Thank you for that introduction, Peter. And if I may also say, thank you for your leadership of the NBBA jury over several years. Your remarkable diplomatic skills mean that we get to the finish line every year and nobody's injured in the process. You got a lot of strong people with a lot of strong views and an incredibly strong array of books every year. And yet we come out of that room aligned and usually all the better for it. So thanks for that, Peter. Now, I've been the adjudicator for the National Business Book Award for about a dozen years. And the one thing that keeps me coming back every year as the boxes arrive is the variety and the quality. These books are absolutely terrific every year. And the variety is really, really fascinating because it really reflects where we are as a society. It's part of the conversation that we're always having because business doesn't exist in a vacuum. Business is very alive and it reflects the community in which it exists. It reflects broader society and what matters to all of us. So the books are always very interesting in that respect. And this year, the books were especially interesting because we've come through the pandemic and there's a level of thoughtfulness there. And I divide the books this year into three categories or buckets. The first is a whole slew of new books for new voices, First Nations in particular. And that was a really terrific thing to see, a discussion of economic issues, cultural concerns, and history through a fresh lens. It was a really, really strong lineup this year in that regard. The second bucket of books are very thoughtful, and these are more introspective books that piece together some of the conversations we've been having through the past 18 months or more about things like climate change, income inequality, sustainability, the erosion of trust in established sort of authorities and institutions, and also kind of where are we in terms of defining the collective good. So those books were in a second category. And third, I would deem to be the classics, great yarns about great characters and great companies. So with all of that said, the challenge is before you. We're looking for submissions for the coming year. Get those in there. And the more diversity, the more new voices, the more new stories we tell, the better. And I'm ready to start reading. So let's go. Back to you, Peter.
All right, Deirdre, thank you. And, it was very nice of her to say nice things about me, but she's one of the main reasons why this jury has been successful over many years, because she does the hard slogging in the initial stages. She sees dozens and dozens and dozens of books and begins the process for us. But as she said, she loves doing it because it gives us this incredible snapshot of the business world in our country and how it's impacting not just our country, but places around the world. So thank you, Deirdre, for giving us the inside look on how our jury made the tough decisions in selecting finalists and winners from such an outstanding nomination group this year. Many thanks for your service and commitment to ensuring the National Business Book Award is truly representative of Canada's best business writing year after year. Truly, Deirdre did a monumental job this year with so many worthy nominations, and there were so many, and new criteria to consider while making the big decision. I'd like to congratulate all the nominees and their publishers for their thoughtful submissions and stories. Published in 2020 and early 2021, amid the uncertainty of the global pandemic, this year's finalists are particularly timely as they confront the same social and economic fissures with which we have all been reckoning. Climate change, growing inequality, distrust, the rise of nationalism, the Indigenous experience in Canada, the erosion of the middle class, and the slowing of economic growth. Our finalists share an appeal for economic philosophies and business policies shaped by humanity and a moral compass, and a warning of the consequences when the only goal is efficiency. Let me introduce the 2021 NBBA Award finalists. Stephen Bown for The Company, The Rise and Fall of the Hudson's Bay Empire. Published by Doubleday Canada, Stephen tells the tale of how one company shaped a nation. The history of the Hudson's Bay Company is so full of drama and ruthless dominance that it needs no embellishment. Mark Carney, Values, Building a Better World for All. Published by Signal, McClellan and Stewart, the former Bank of Canada and the former Bank of England governor, Mark Carney advocates for mission-oriented capitalism and sees an opportunity in COVID-19's disruption to reimagine our systems to recognize value beyond price. Grand Chief Ronald M. Derrickson, Fight or Submit, Standing Tall in Two Worlds. Published by ECU Press, Grand Chief Derrickson's memoir recounts his life's journey through poverty, business success, and political leadership. Roger L. Martin, When More is Not Better, Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency. Published by the Harvard Business Review Press, Roger lays out with unambiguous urgency his solutions to our greatest challenges, underpinned by a balance of efficiency and resilience. On a personal note, for all of us jury members, Roger is a former NBBA Jury Chair. And Jeff Rubin, The Expendables, How the Middle Class Got Screwed by Globalization. Jeff always has a way with words, doesn't he? Published by Penguin Random House Canada, former CIBC chief economist Jeff Rubin expands on his unapologetically bleak predictions from over a decade ago by examining the consequences of globalization on the middle class and on society as a whole. Jeff's also the winner of the 2010 NBBA for his book, Why Your World is About to Get a Whole Lot Smaller, Oil and the End of Globalization, published by Random House Canada. So let's meet our esteemed finalists and hear what they have to say about their contributions to Canada's rich history of business writing. So we're going to capture a couple of minutes with each of our finalists here. Stephen Bown is first, and he's talking to us from Canmore, Alberta today. Stephen, your book, The Company, revisits a firmly established yet misunderstood foundational pillar in Canadian history, and that's the formation of the Hudson's Bay Company. What should Canadians know about the company and what they've missed, what they haven't known, and which they discover in your book? What should they know?
The most important takeaway from the book, I would say, for people, would be to have a greater appreciation for the extent to which the company was entirely integrated with multiple Indigenous societies over the entire course of its 200-year monopoly. The company is often presented as some, monolithic, sort of evil, domineering entity that's run out of London, England, that comes over in a bunch of white male heroic explorers come and conquer this territory and take it over and seize all the money and cart it all back to England. And, that is a little bit of the story. That is a little bit of the story. However, a fuller appreciation of the company's activities over time reveals that when those people first came over across the ocean on these creaky sailing ships, 6 weeks at sea with scurvy or diseases plaguing them, sailing through ice storms, and the ship's captains are always worried about the ship sinking or striking a rock or an iceberg in Hudson's Bay, and they get out on the coast of this bleak, wind-lashed, stony shore, and they struggle onto the stony beach, and they set up some operations there. The first thing that happened over multiple years of being there was that they had to integrate with the local people who were there seasonally. And of course, being that it was so difficult to travel across the ocean, people would often sign on contracts for 4, 5, 8 years, 10 years at a time. So they weren't traveling back and forth between their homeland anymore. They were, seeking a new life for themselves, and they immediately married into those local societies. They had children into those societies, and that's the whole foundation for the company's business was relationships with people. And people don't understand, I think, the extent to which most of the people who worked for the Hudson's Bay Company during all its time were actually of mixed heritage or indigenous. There was very few, maybe only 500 or 600 people who were directly from England at any given time.
Stephen, let me ask you this, just as a brief final question. What can we take away from this, or what should today's world take away from the insights that we see in this book about how the company operated? What still applies today?
It still applies that relationships are the key foundation for any success in business, and it happened throughout history too. And when it comes to looking at something in the past as monumental as the company's history that completely changed North American history over time with its interaction all the way to the Pacific Ocean, it's not a static thing. It changes over time, and it's the key relationships that an enterprise develops with all the different people and try to solve solutions that are of benefit to all the people who are involved in the activities.
All right, Stephen, thank you. Next up, Mark Carney. Governor, your book, Values, thoroughly dissects the evolution of modern economic theory and examines how our values shape global priorities. In your experience as a G7 governor, and now as the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, how have you observed the shift from value to values-driven approach in governments and business?
Well, thank you, Peter. It's an honor to be on this panel in this group. And let me start from cross-reference Roger Martin's thing on efficiency. When I joined as a G7 official in the run-up to the financial crisis, I distinctly remember, and I recounted in the book, a discussion amongst the G7 authorities about the excesses, or apparent excesses in the market. And the response was, look, the market knows more than we do. And the undercurrent of the market's always right. And that was a mindset, a sort of self-capture, cognitive capture of policymakers in the run-up to the financial crisis. The market's not always right. And price does not always equal value. Efficiency is not the end goal. And that sort of view of entering the realm of faith, if you will, faith in the market, led to some of the challenges we had in the financial crisis. And some of the responses to the financial crisis, very much led by Canada, brought back broader society to the market, social foundations to the market, responsibility to individuals in the market, a sense of responsibility for the system of all participants. And I think there's a common theme that runs through many of the works today, and probably the long list of books that the jury's read, which is being part of a system, and business is part of a system. And, never more so than with climate, where a recognition of the role that business can play in helping to solve the climate crisis. And over the course of my time, and I'll finish on this, as a G7 authority, we saw this evolution from business being apart from nature, the market being separate from the climate crisis, to recognizing what society values which is sustainability and addressing the climate crisis, and the beginnings, and I'm not going to overstate it, the beginnings of business organizing to be very much part of the solution.
You know, climate change, as you said, and COVID have been the kind of constant and dominant drivers of change in your analysis. Since Values was published, how would you assess our reaction to these challenges?
Well, I think that when COVID began, and about the same time as I began working on the book, I distinctly recalled the reaction after the financial crisis. The focus on climate change was mounting before the financial crisis, and quite frankly, the focus shifted back to addressing the problems in the financial sector and recovering from that, and climate was put on the back burner. We lost a number of key years. So I was concerned when COVID crisis began that we would face, given the scale of the economic hit, that we would have a similar reaction. In fact, what happened with COVID in general, there are exceptions, but in general, people prioritized each other. They made decisions in favor of their neighbor, people they hadn't met, at great cost to themselves on an individual and societal level, and elevated the value of health and solidarity, elevated those values. And something similar happened with climate, where the view at the start of 2020, less than a third of the world had a commitment to net zero. Now we're at 90% plus by emissions committed to net zero. And that is the product, it's governments catching up to the product of societal attitudes, an elevation of that value of sustainability. And the consequence has been that we have the financial sector committing to being part of the solution. We have businesses coming together to find solutions around energy, all aspects of the economy. And we have the prospect of truly being able to address this. Now, it needs to stick. It needs to be maintained. It needs to be reinforced. I think the critical point, and I'll finish on this, is that this recognition that businesses have many stakeholders, and there are many stakeholders today and in the future, and a responsibility to build a legacy for the future.
Mark Carney is talking to us from Etobicoke today, so thank you for that, Governor. I
like that you call me Governor.
Yeah, I've always liked the American way of doing things, where you kind of keep your title long after you've left it. So you know, and because you've got governor twice, surely that means something. You get to keep that for a while. All right, moving on. Grand Chief Ronald Erickson joins us from Kelowna, British Columbia, and he's just on the phone. Unfortunately, I had the same problem yesterday, Chief, when I was trying to do an event, and you know, I was having trouble with the picture on Zoom because they kept trying to get me to update, and I couldn't remember my password. You know, listen, we don't need to go into all that. We're glad you're with us, and you are with us by phone, so or at least on the audio component of Zoom. So let's talk a little bit about Fight or Submit, because it stands alone in our group today for being a very personal account of your journey through poverty, success, and Indigenous political leadership. So as we engage, as a country tries to engage in reconciliation, what message do you want to convey to Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, with your story?
Well, part of my, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. We can hear you fine.
Okay. A part of my story, the reason I wrote it was because I've had a very, very varied life. You know, aside from being a racing boat champion in 1969, right up to being chief, then to grand chief, and to having international companies. But the story was more for the other Native people and some of the non-Native people in Canada to understand how difficult it is for us to become economically successful. I was an exception. There's other exceptions too, but I was one of the exceptions that managed to do it no matter what they did. And my life entailed everywhere from a hit being put on me because I was raising the rents on reserve to and surviving that with 288 stitches, to fighting the government, to having a federal judicial inquiry against me to try and get me to shut up and quit fighting them, to coming through all that at great personal expense, and sometimes a very, very lonely life. But my message is not to fear to the Native people, to fight for their rights if there's injustice, and how to do it. Do your homework, do your research. If you got to fight and if you go to court, you get all your information there. So it's the same thing. If you're going to negotiate, know what you're negotiating for. Know what your end result is going to be before you start. So, I have another book coming out, and it's about negotiation.
We'll get to that next year, Chief.
Yeah. But
what's been the reaction that you've received from this book?
I thought it would be really nasty.
Pardon me?
I thought it would be really nasty, and I have to tell you, I haven't had one negative comment, not one. And because I thought a lot of the non-Indian people would be really angry over the book, and but it wasn't. It was a surprise to me. Most of the people commented not only when they realized what I'd gone through, but the history that I put into the book to tell people where we come from and how we got here and what happened to us. Like for the first white man we saw, how they just killed our people just for sport. Right up to the West Bank First Nation being one of the second self-governing nations in Canada, who has over $1 billion a year income now. It does better than most of the municipalities around us.
That's for sure. Listen, we're going to leave it at that, Chief, on this. Let's just say that far from anger, there's a lot of admiration for this book, and that's one of the reasons it's on the final list of the final 5 books being considered for the National Business Book Award. Moving on to Roger Martin's book. Now, Roger is actually today on a flight. I think it's from Frankfurt to Dubai, and for those of you who have taken that flight, it's a long one, and we couldn't connect with Roger in his seat on that flight, but we do have Felicia Sanusis from the Harvard Business Review is joining us for a moment from Boston. And Felicia, give us a sense here. What economic and social trends was Roger observing that motivated him to write this book?
I think Roger was really looking at the disappearance of the middle class that had been so robust until the 1970s, and that the distribution had really focused for the income on that top sort of section. And he really wanted to show that and reverse it. And how we had been thinking about economic efficiency over the past several decades might not be the best path forward. And instead that we need to consider how everything works in a more complex system instead of the single-minded pursuit that we've had for the last several decades.
All right, Felicia, thank you. Thank you for that. Jeff Rubin's with us as well. He's been, as I said, he's a former winner of this award, and he's had quite the record of books on very innovative and exciting and controversial ideas when it comes around on the business sector. The Expendables examines the consequences of globalization and trade policy on society, particularly on a shrinking middle class. Jeff, we're told that free trade is the key to shared prosperity and economic growth, but why are today's policies leaving so many behind or making them, as the title says in your book, expendable?
For decades, we've been told that free trade is the path to economic prosperity and lifts all boats, and that certainly has not happened. It's true that GDP is bigger, but it's not true that for the most part, we've benefited from that. In fact, the policies that have led to robust growth have been for the most part, immiserizing to the middle class. So I wrote this book in an attempt to connect the dots between the trade policies and the trade treaties that countries like Canada and the United States and the OECD and throughout the OECD have pursued since GATT, the W Trade Organization, NAFTA, and what's happened to the middle class, because people have not always made that connection. And I think that's a connection that is really being underlined today.
If you could give us a headline on what needs to change to make this a more inclusive global society, what would that headline be?
Well, Peter, it's not so much what needs to be changed, what hasn't changed. And I think that this is a good news story for the Expendables. What hasn't changed is the trade policies that we viewed as pariah, the return to protectionism that we saw under the Trump administration. Here we are well into the Biden administration, and not one tariff against China has been reduced. In fact, I would say President Biden has upped the protectionist barrier with his call for greater domestic content in U.S. procurement, something that certainly could impact Canada. But I think that we're seeing, as we say in finance, mean reversion. The pendulum has moved the other way. And I think underscored by the disruption of global supply chains, we may just see a return to local production. And local production means paying local wages. And perhaps the Expendables just won't be so expendable anymore.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. There you have it, 5 extraordinary Canadian authors with 5 exceptional stories and groundbreaking ideas. Perhaps now you understand why the jury's decision this year was so tough. I'd now like to introduce the NBB Award presenting sponsor, Miles NADAL, to say a few words. Miles.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It's really an honor and a privilege for all of us at Peerage Capital to sponsor the National Business Book Awards. This is our 2nd year, and we look forward to our involvement going forward. This year is a very important one as a result of the fact that we've gone through uncertain times with the COVID-19 pandemic. But despite all that uncertainty, the finalists for this book award competition have done remarkable things, and they've used their ingenuity and their ability to write fantastic things about many subjects, including business, entrepreneurship, and other areas that are very familiar to me. As an entrepreneur myself, I understand the idea of overcoming adversity and finding opportunity in challenging times. I think we are very blessed in Canada to have such wonderful talent writing about Canadian stories in Canada with a Canadian theme that expresses our uniqueness as a country. The subjects of these books include the economy, business, and other areas from a completely unique Canadian perspective and a holistic way, which is so imperative. The result is a collection of exceptionally important, thought-provoking works that will be very memorable for many years to come. I've always believed that entrepreneurship was critical for the future success of Canada as an entrepreneurial society. It's as a result of these that we will create more employment, more prosperity, and have the opportunity for private-public partnerships to give back to this country and help those less fortunate. The topics addressed in the National Business Book Awards are topics that are so critical for all of us as Canadians to consider. I thank the finalists for their hard work, dedication, and ingenuity in making these fantastic books. These books will be very important for many years to come for all Canadians. Thank you very much for your time. Best of luck to all of you.
All right, and thank you, Miles, for 2 things, for those remarks, but also for your continued support. This now being the 2nd year in a row that you've been the presenting sponsor for us at the National Business Book Award. We really do appreciate it. And I know the authors appreciate it as well. So, okay, enough of the dance. We're now to that moment that we've all been waiting for. Time to announce the winner of the 2021 National Business Book Award. And just once again to say, this wasn't easy. I've been on this jury for more than a dozen years. And I cannot recall a year where it has taken as long to come to a conclusion. First on the list of the 5 finalists, but then on the decision about a winner. There was a lot of back and forth, and there were more than a few meetings and discussions about this. So if I could have that virtual drum roll. We hear it? I don't hear it, but we can imagine it, because that's what this time and day is all about. The winner is another instance of our year of firsts at the NBBAs, because we have 2 co-winners. The jury came to the conclusion, and with their votes, that there would be 2 winners this year. First time ever. Stephen R. Bown's The Company, The Rise and Fall of the Hudson's Bay Empire, and Mark Carney's Values, Building a Better World for All. Congratulations to both Stephen and Mark, and we'd love to hear from you both again for a minute or two on your reaction to the win here. This is the first anybody of this group has heard this, so let's start with Stephen. Your thoughts.
A little bit shocked right now. I didn't expect that. I was actually extraordinarily pleased just to make the long list, and then the short list. Yeah, okay. It's just absolutely incredible. I guess first I would say I'd like to recognize all the other shortlisted longer authors and the long listed authors for giving me a whole bunch of what's going to prove to be thought-provoking reading material over the holidays that I wouldn't otherwise have known about these books. New ideas are always important in any society. I was always asking myself the question, why is it that I didn't hear about any of these books really, well, to any great extent. And because of that, I'd like to specifically thank the National Business Book Awards and its sponsors and its volunteers and all the effort that goes into it for bringing attention to these ideas and stories. There really isn't any other award or forum for public recognition of nonfiction that deals with facts and arguments that are trying to make sense of our society right now, whether it's interpreting from the past or whether it's looking to the future or dealing with the bewildering aspects of a changing society. Most of the other nonfiction awards and forums have morphed into prioritizing introspective personal musing or tangential philosophizing, which is all, I'm not trying to dismiss that at all, but, it doesn't help us solve or even identify the society level problems. So, a really big thank you to the important work of the National Business Book Awards. I don't know.
You're more than welcome. And it's wonderful to see somebody who is so taken off guard by the announcement that they are one of the winners this year. So I'm sure there's going to be a big party in Canmore tonight, and people will be lining up outside to take part in that party. All right, Mark Carney, Governor, what do you have to say?
Oh, well, look, I'm grateful. First off, I'm grateful that Stephen came before me, so I had time to compose myself. But congratulations, Stephen, and everyone who was on the short list and long list. And let me start by echoing a few things Stephen said. I want to thank Miles NADAL. I want to thank the National Business Book Awards for the commitment to these issues. And when you think about the books on the short list, the books on the long list, part of a bigger conversation that we're having, an action around the conversation about the role of the company and the intertwined role of the company and business in society at a time of these big challenges, these challenges of inequality, the expendables, Jeff's point, the challenges of addressing climate change, broader challenges of reconciliation and moving forward with Indigenous peoples and all Canadians. And so this is critical. Let me very quickly, I should thank Doug Porter at Penguin Random House who helped publish it, and Carolyn Michelle back in the UK. And I'll just say, one final thing, which is we're all products of Canada. And, when Stephen's book came out, it reminded me of growing up, born in Fort Smith, and, the company store, there was one store, it was the Hudson's Bay, and it was central to, what life was like there. And I've always had that association with it, and always, as many Canadians, we're associated with that company and its ups and downs over the year and over the centuries. And I'll finish just on, what Canada brings to that, and Canadian companies and Canadian business. It's what Miles mentioned, it's entrepreneurship, which is remarkable from First Nations out. But it's also actually how we're organized. The directors of companies have duty to the corporation, not just to shareholders. That's different in Canada than elsewhere. The way the Canadian financial institutions responded to the financial crisis. Tell you, we got together in a room and we all realized we had responsibility, and they stepped up. And the way I think we all need to get together and collectively address the climate crisis. And I'm confident that we will, but it's partly because of initiatives like this that do that, and so I'm thrilled just to be a part of it. And look, you've got to give back, and I will take my share of the award and give it on to Girls Who Code and Indigenous Guardians of Canada. So thank you very much.
Good for you. That's great to hear. Congratulations once again to both Stephen Bown and Mark Carney, whose names now get added to that distinguished list for the past 36 years now of great Canadian business writers who have told the story of how the business community operates in this country, sometimes the difficulties and some of the tough decisions that community has made. Sometimes they've worked, sometimes they haven't worked, but in all, the incisive writing that has taken place by business writers and those interested in business, like the two winners we're seeing here today. With that, we've reached the end of our virtual ceremony. I do ask you to, if you're a podcast listener, make sure you, when you stop listening to my podcast, that you listen to the NBBA podcast series, Curating the Business Conversation. It's hosted by Mitch Joel of the 6 Pixels Group. We had a limited time to talk to the authors today, but Mitch has the opportunity to talk to them in a little more detail, has a deeper dive with each author and their story. Now, nominations for the 2022 NBBA will open in January. If you've written a business book or know someone who has, please nominate books for next year's award and follow the NBBAs on Twitter. Once again, that handle is at NBBA Award. No, NBB Award, all right? For our friends in the media, please contact Marianne Friedman to arrange interviews. And can I just say for Marianne, who's been with this since its inception, this award process could not have happened any of those years, and especially through these past 2 years of difficulties without Marianne, who kind of props it up almost single-handedly. Today's award ceremony live stream video will be available to view online in the coming days at www.nbbaward.com. And you saw how fascinating it was. I'm sure many of you will spend this weekend watching it many times. Thank you once again to all the sponsors and partners who make the National Business Book Award possible. Excuse me, and a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Miles NADAL, and all our sponsors, Targeted Strategies Group, Stephen Smith, Oxford Properties Group, and once again, the Government of Canada. And thanks to all of you who have joined us virtually to celebrate an exceptional year in Canadian business writing and publishing. We'll see you in person, we hope, we all hope, this time next year. If you haven't already, please be sure to pick up any or all of these books. They are all absolutely worth it. And with the holidays soon upon us, be sure to order all your book gifts as soon as possible. And let me make that point again, because we've heard supply chains talked about here today on a number of fronts, and there are supply issues. So if you're planning on books for Christmas gifts this year, I'd get them early. I wouldn't wait too long, as those delays are happening. So stay tuned for next year's nominations. Happy holidays. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll say goodbye for now.